Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Friday, August 22nd, 2025, and today we are going to be talking about the state of Virginia and the upcoming congressional elections in the 2026 midterm elections, as we are now starting to see top Democrats across this state sort of indicate that they are open to a redraw of their congressional boundaries ahead of a future election, whether that be 2026 or the 2028 presidential election. Now, seeing this tweet come out from the president pro tempore of the Virginia State Senator, Luis Lucas, who has been representing in Virginia for quite some time now and has risen to the ranks as one of the most prominent and top Democrats in the state Senate and arguably just across both chambers of the legislature, we have been looking at a conversation that has really run rampant across Virginia, coming after Texas's redraw and California's response, and many other states that are open to the idea of redrawing their congressional boundaries. In the state of Virginia, we are now seeing an appetite to redraw their congressional maps ahead of a future election that would ultimately benefit the Democratic Party. Now, to give you a bit of backstory on the redraw in the state of Virginia, in 2020, there was a census that was conducted nationwide, to which Virginia did not see any change in their electoral vote count, but what they did find, ultimately, was that the maps needed to be redrawn. That's standard. A lot of states redraw their maps drastically, and Virginia saw some pretty minimal shifts here, but ultimately, this map was inspired by what was happening in the Independent Redistricting Commission that contained Republican and Democratic legislators. Now, since neither of them could really agree on a map that needed to be implemented, the courts had to draw the map. And the court map that was drawn that ultimately showed that Republicans were in a better position than maybe a Democratic map would have drawn, or one that was written out by Democratic commissioners, or even just a Democratic legislature. The map ultimately ended up in a position where there was quite a few competitive seats, but the GOP did have the upper hand in comparison to other states that had voted for Donald Trump or Republicans in previous elections that had drawn extreme gerrymanders in their states. And to give you a bit of an understanding, an example, in 2024, Virginia voted with 5 of their seats to the Republican Party, whereas Democrats got about 6. Now, given the actual vote share of this state, Kamala Harris winning it by about 6 points, the respective number of seats won by both political parties actually makes a lot of sense. But that's under a perfect system in a perfect world, and in today's reality, Democrats are looking for something more. And that's because Republicans just redrew the state of Texas to give Republicans 5 more seats on the congressional delegation here. Democrats only have 13 to the Republican Party's 25, and this by no means replicates what the national popular vote was or what the statewide popular vote was on the presidential election. This was a very clear and blatant gerrymander, and now Republicans are looking to go even further. And when you think about the states that voted for such a way, for instance, that voted in favor of Donald Trump by a margin of roughly 6 points, I think about states like Arizona, where Democrats only have 3 seats to the Republicans' 6, or a more egregious state where Donald Trump only won by 2, a state like Georgia, where Democrats only have 5 seats and Republicans have 9. In the state of Virginia, as a state that did vote for Kamala Harris and voted for Biden by 10 points, where Democrats currently hold control of the House of Delegates and the Virginia State Senate here, there's been an argument to be made for Democrats, should they win the governorship this November, that a redraw is necessary. Now, Luis Lucas tweeted out that every state in the nation should follow suit in reference to what California is doing, saying that people should, quote, stay tuned for Virginia. Now, mid-decade redistricting is quite difficult, and it doesn't look like it's going to happen ahead of the 2026 midterm elections, but it might happen ahead of the 2028 presidential election. Democrats have an appetite for something to change. The big obstacle here in the state of Virginia is that in order to pass across here, you're going to find that even if it does, even through this narrowest majority, you're going to find that Governor Glenn Youngkin would never even be in support of something like this because he is a Republican and would never sign on to an eventual passing of the bill. But it wouldn't happen, and it would ultimately be up to the voters anyway. And so what we would see here is that Democrats, if they win the governorship, would be in a much more comfortable position to pass legislation like this that would need to pass through different sessions of the state legislature between elections, meaning there must be an election in between the time at which you pass the first and you pass the second, and then voters would make a decision on it, to which there is probably a comfortable expectation that if this energy maintains and continues itself through the remainder of this second Trump presidency, that you do find that voters agree with this decision. Virginia will be an interesting case, especially following what we'll see in the state of California. Again, We'll get to that point later on in the video, but the point is right now that while it may not happen ahead of 2026, Virginia is actively exploring their options and looking at it in a way that they never looked at it before. Because Democrats did arguably get screwed over with this map here. Republicans are, more competitive than in most states where Democrats have won, in some cases, by less. When you think about it, Democrats are in a position where they could have drawn an absolutely egregious gerrymander across the state and given Republicans maybe just 4 seats or 3 seats across the state. These are things that you could find if you drew the map in favor of the Democratic Party. And Democrats at the time had a trifecta, had control of the state Senate, they had control of the state legislature, the state House of Delegates, they had the governorship. This was possible. But when Democrats put forth that amendment to implement an independent commission, they were more thinking about it at the time when they had control of what was happening. And that's exactly what's cited in this article. When they talk to, different elected officials from the state of Virginia, they ask about the constitutional amendment that was changed here that implemented the independent and bipartisan redistricting panel. And what we found here is that some of these elected officials say that Democrats have their hands tied behind their backs. At the time that Virginia adopted the amendment, Democrats thought they were leading America. But given what's going on now, it looks like Democrats are on the wrong side of the trend. They're an acknowledgement that they don't have the House of Representatives nationally, the Senate, where they were looking to pass a bill to ban gerrymandering nationwide. They don't have the presidency. 2020 was supposed to usher in, a whole new wave of Democratic governance, and while it did to a degree, gerrymandering was largely left untouched. And so now Democrats in Virginia are looking to this as a state to say, we have an opportunity. Maybe not in 2026, but we have an opportunity to respond to a state like California. And given what's happening in this governorship, Democrats are more likely than not going to win the governorship, more likely than not going to easily win the House of Delegates here. The chances at which Democrats win a supermajority in the Virginia House of Delegates is nearly double that of what Republicans have at just a slim majority in the House of Delegates. We are finding that the Virginia House of Delegates and the necessary components to pass these bills would be there after the 2025 election, where Spanberger has a 97% chance of winning and is expected to win the state by about 11 points. And taking a look at the data, not much there to contradict that. And so thinking about the redraw and thinking about what it would do, well, if you look at the old map, 2020, that map that was implemented up to 2020 and the map that was implemented afterwards, the old map here did have more competitive districts. But when you take a look at the actual breakdown, it was Democrats who came out ahead. Why? Because the map here and the redraw and the districts were favorable to the Democratic Party. Yes, they were competitive, but ultimately Democrats came out ahead. 2 years later, Republicans are gaining a seat. Another year later, they're on the verge of flipping 2 more seats. Had this map just shifted about 5 points to the right, you would actually find that the map here would give Republicans 7 seats, right? And so that's something that Democrats look to and say, well, that's a fundamental flaw in our map because of the competitive seats here. If you do the same for the Democratic Party, they might reach the same seat share, but it doesn't do enough. Because what that would do for Republicans is flip 2 seats. For Democrats, it would flip just 1. And so even if you bring it to the point of the 2018 midterm elections, what was that? So shifting by 5, a 10-point shift here, you still find yourself at 7-4, right? Which is the exact number that Republicans would have if they had just outperformed by about 2.5 points from the 2024 election. So really thinking about that and really diving into that, the Virginia map is not that conducive to Democrats doing that well, right? A 7-4 map, again, is the same map that Democrats were looking at in the 2020 election. And 2020 was not a 2018 style election. And so thinking about how a redraw could affect this, Democrats might be able to draw a map that gives them 7 seats at baseline and 8 in a Democratic year and 6 in a red wave year. Because right now, arguably, they don't have much to lose. They're on track to win the governor election. They're on track to win the House of Delegates election. And the appetite for this for Democrats across the country has skyrocketed as Texas has now confirmed their redraw, and states like California are responding to it in an adequate manner. And now we're seeing people like Kamala Harris and Barack Obama comment on it and praise it. And now you're starting to see elected officials from across states, including battleground states, really pay attention and decide that if they are to be in the position where they can do something like this, that they are going to do it. And while it may not happen ahead of 2026 because of the constitutional boundaries that are in place that prohibit it from taking place ahead of 2026, ahead of 2028 would still benefit the Democratic Party. And I do believe that this energy and enthusiasm around redrawing the maps and fighting fire with fire is only going to build up as more and more Democratic voters become angrier with Donald Trump. At the beginning of his presidency, we saw his second presidency, we did not see the same level of enthusiasm and engagement from the party, and it was largely a party that felt like they were in disarray. It felt very similar to, I think, how Republicans felt after the 2020 election, going after 2016, where you win a trifecta, then losing it all 4 years later. Same thing for the Democratic Party. But now you're seeing Democrats are finding their voice. People like Gavin Newsom and other Democrats across the country are looking to this and say, we're not going to just let you stand by and push back on us in Texas and Florida and Indiana and Missouri. And Republicans are looking back at this and saying, Democrats have never fought back, so we're going to move forward with it. And now Democrats are finally waking up and saying that we are going to fight fire with fire. And so just thinking about what's happening in the House of Delegates race, what's happening in the governor's race, Democrats are on track for a monumental victory. This could likely be the biggest majority the Democrats could see in the House of Delegates in a very, very long time. And it could benefit Governor Abigail Spanberger, would-be governor at the time, very tremendously, because it would allow pretty much a green light to move forward with pieces of legislation that Democrats see as vital and necessary to governance in the state, including a bill to repeal the Independent Commission. And if Democrats are this confident that they will maintain control of the House of Delegates, of a legislative chamber, they can get rid of the IRC and say that we're going to go ahead and draw the maps ourselves. And what that would do, what if Democrats are winning in 2029, which I know, again, is a big jump and a skip away, but it's a gamble, and it's a gamble I think Democrats believe they will have a better indication of by the time they push for passing of this bill, because likely that voters would have to make a decision on it in the 2026 midterm elections, already an environment that would undoubtedly favor the Democratic Party. The maps here could be in a position where Democrats do come out ahead, because a gerrymander in the state of Virginia is not impossible to see. These are actually some pretty clearly and fairly drawn maps, given the partisan composition of the state. But this is not about fairness right now, given what's happening on the national level. If states like Texas are redrawing, states like Virginia don't want to sit by idly and say that you can go ahead and do what you want. As long as there is a Republican governor, though, you are going to find major obstacles coming within the governor's mansion. But as soon as Abigail Spanberger is elected and Democrats take control of all of the chamber, it is very possible the Democrats get into a position where they do end up being able to redraw the map. Now, political appetite is always something that does fluctuate. Again, I'm still adamant that I think that over the next 3 years, we are going to see continued appetite for Democrats to push back, especially if any of these Democrats, like Spanberger or anybody else, has any indication that they have, future political ambitions, that they want to run for higher office, that they want to go forward and do X, Y, and Z and say that they're going to be in a position. These are all things that are, calculus points, more often than not, for a lot of the political candidates that look to races like this. And so thinking about, or look to situations like this, thinking about someone like Gavin Newsom, who did not float the idea of a mid-decade, redraw, has been in office since 2019, up until the point where Texas did, and Democrats were looking for a response that was adequate and, met the moment, and Newsom provided that. And we will see if the Virginia Democrats do exactly that. Because there is a very strong possibility that after this election is said and done for, Democrats being in as advantageous of a position that they are, that they redraw the map. And so thinking about, again, what I think the map would look like is probably something a little bit more similar to what it was like in 2020, just a more locked-in and solid-in congressional map. You'd find Democrats probably at about 7 seats at a baseline, maybe 8 if they're able to expand on it. Again, no guarantee that that's going to happen, but it's certainly something that is actively being explored, especially as top Democrats across the state open up the idea to it. I don't imagine that Spanberger will comment on this redraw or anything of the sort yet. I'm not sure exactly how she feels about it. This is something that is up in the air and entirely, what the would-be governor wants to make a decision on, and would-be state legislative body that is likely going to go to the Democratic Party far more than it is likely to go to the Republican Party. And so we'll keep our eyes peeled about Virginia. I think it's a very interesting state, especially given its recent electoral trends. Might have trended a little bit to the right, but Democrats ultimately control both of the chambers right now. There just is a Republican governor, and so we will have to see if this is possible, if this is something the Democrats move forward with. But if it is a state the Democrats do end up pushing in a way that is more advantageous for them, They'd lock in some of these battleground seats that might be taking away tens of millions of dollars from other seats, and they might draw districts like Virginia's 1st and Virginia's 2nd into more solid and more Democratic districts, and what that would ultimately do is really give Democrats the upper hand. Potentially upwards of 7 or 8 seats, a gain of 1 to 2, which would counteract a state like Missouri or Indiana, or even, a combination of the two, redrawing their maps mid-decade, following suit in Texas, which would equalize the map, maybe not necessarily in 2026, but likely ahead of 2028. And it will be something that is worth watching because Virginia has been a state that has been uniquely difficult for Democrats as of late, but a lot better for them in the 2025 cycle, and we'll see exactly how they capitalize on that, what is expected to be a pretty solid victory for the opposition party that is likely to take the governor's mansion and the most, expansive House of Delegates majority they've seen in nearly decades. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video for you to watch, and then a playlist for my 2025 election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all later today.